Hello and welcome back. In this video I'm going to go over some examples of a method for decorating blown glass using a top-loading furnace like this one. I designed and built this furnace in the year 2002, and I did a tutorial video on the design and building of this type of furnace at that time, and this particular type of furnace is now in use in over 30 countries. It's been built by a lot of people. Okay, let's get on with it. So this really freaks out a lot of glass blowers, but what this technique involves is throwing pieces of colored sheet glass into the furnace. So I start off with a square and I nip off the corners, which give me basically an 8-sided shape, much like a stop sign. And I'll explain why in a minute. So if this is the top view, looking down into the crucible, the piece of glass is plopped down into the center, and it sits on the top surface of the glass. So here's a side view, and I'll explain in a minute about the importance of the shape of this previous gather for picking up glass this way. So there's my crucible, my glass level, and this thicker line is the piece of glass I've thrown in. So when I take the gather, I plunge downwards into the center, and what happens is the colored glass folds up onto the sides. And when it's fully submerged, I make sure that the base glass, the clear glass in the crucible, goes above the points, my 8 points, so that when I lift it back out again, I don't have any color trailing down the outside. So the color becomes fully cased by the base glass in the crucible. And again, in this drawing it shows that too, where as this is being lifted upwards, the clear base glass in the crucible flows down around the entire gather and gives it a casing of clear. And here's the result. So there's my first couple of gathers, my colored layer, and a clear casing. And all of that takes place in a matter of a couple of minutes. It's very fast. So here's an example here that I'll show, and you can clearly see the points. There's 8 points going around here. And this one, I plunged this one off center, so it's an uneven distribution of the color, whereas in most cases it's much more closer than this. And I left all the points this time because it kind of looks like it's painted on or something like that. But I just wanted to show this as an example of those points and how those points travel up. They travel up further than the level of the color. So if those 4 points instead of 8, then those points would travel up much farther because those points are further away from the center. But this is what I typically try and do, is I neck these off before the area where the points start to extend. So long, thin shapes work better than rounded tennis ball shapes for picking up this kind of color, and for a couple of reasons. It's easier to center this when you can see around it very well. This obstructs the view of the piece of glass. It's harder to find the center because the decision has to be made very quickly where to plunge it. And secondly, more color wraps up on the sides of this type of gather than on this type. Most of it winds up on the bottom for this type of gather, so that's why I prefer this shape. So for the first example, I'll use up some of these chips here. These are the corners that I cut off the squares. Nothing goes to waste around here. So I'll throw a handful of these in the furnace and use it for the first vase, which will be a 3-gather vase. And I'll show the gathering technique and the shaping of the starter bubble as well for this type of coloring. So here's the first gather. And the second gather. So this is my best shape of gather here. This has even wall thickness all the way through. My starter bubble goes all the way down. And this is ready to pick up color on the third gather. This is 2 gathers. So if I find that the second gather melts my first gather and the glass becomes unmanageable, then it just means I need to turn the glass temperature down a little bit. And I'll just throw the color chips down like that. And I have to position them more towards the center of the pot, and I have to put them in a region where they'll all be picked up by the third gather. Notice I'm not putting any in the center because that'll be the bottom of the vessel. And now about 30 seconds later, I'm going to stick this in the middle and turn it in a clockwise motion as I'm plunging down to pick up all the color in a spiraled motion. All right, I'm 3 or 4 minutes in and I've got all my gathers and my color ready to blow it out. And here's the result of that vase. So I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see 6 distinctly different colors in there, all swirled together. So this was an 8-minute vase. I timed it. The ones that take the extra 4th gather can actually be up to 12 minutes. So it's a very fast coloring technique. So for my next example, I'm going to use this glass here. It's a Bullseye 2250. It's a beautiful glass. I love it. This is the old stock made with cranberry red. The new stock is made with cadmium red, and it reduces. Okay, I'm going to cut a square about 3 inches by 3 inches. And then I'll nip the corners off. So I'm going to plunge straight through this one. I'm not going to twist it up as I take the gather. And for these bigger ones that take 4 gathers, the third gather I want to be fairly thin, so I'm just going to strip off what I can against the side of the pot. And I'm going to throw in the color. So I'm going to put a drop of water in the middle and fracture it for 2 reasons. The first reason is that there could be a little tiny trapped air bubble underneath there somewhere, and it allows the air to escape. And the second reason is it breaks up the design into little continents that float around in it. It's a great decorating technique. And I'm going to plunge straight down in the center, pick up all the color, and there's my 4th gather. You can get some pretty decent gathers out of this pot furnace. All right, looking nice. And here's a look at that one now that it's cooled. That glass is totally amazing. Look at the color variations and all the really interesting stuff going on. That's just crazy stuff. It's really amazing what you can get out of one little piece of colored sheet glass when you blow it out. Wow. So next I'm going to use this glass here. It's Aventurine Blue, made by Bullseye, and this is the thin rolled, so it's 2 mils in thickness, and it's so dense it won't pass light. But when it's blown out, it just comes to life and it looks beautiful. And being a aventurine, it's full of little silver sparkles. So I'm going to cut a square, about 1.5 inch square, for my next one. So in goes the aventurine blue square, and I'll bring it into the center, give it about 30 seconds. Now I'm going to pull out points, kind of like combing or raking would be doing, like this. There we go, little points. And I'm going to plunge through the middle of this while twisting. There, let's have a look at this one. So you can see down here where it was solid blue but quite inflated, it's much less intense. But as the lines move away from the blown out area, they intensify and get much richer. And there's all those little points that I swirled up there in my gather. And because it's aventurine, this whole area, even though it's not very blue, it's full of little silver sparkles. It's really nice. So for this example, I'm going to show 2 layers. I'm going to make a 3 gather vase, so the piece will be a little bit smaller this time. And I'm going to cut up some very intense, rich aventurine green, and I'm going to throw that in the furnace first and melt it and swirl it around, and then I'm going to throw this color on top of it. So basically it'll be a swirly random design in rich sparkly green, and this will be the background color. This piece of 3mm aventurine green is so dense it doesn't even pass light. It's perfect for blowing out because it'll hold its color really well. So in go the color chips. And I've got to, once again, put them near the middle somewhere. I'm going to melt these in a little bit first, and then I'm going to move them around. So I'll give them about 30 seconds. There, I'm just going to swirl them around a little bit, keeping some water on my punty so my punty doesn't stick. And I've also moved them away from the center, like I did previously. Now I'm going to throw in the colored plate glass, the sheet glass. Put a drop of water on it, and fracture it. So I'm not going to twist this one, I'm just going to plunge straight down through the center like this. Alright, let's have a look at this one. So there's the background color there, and there's the foreground color, the swirled green. Wow, that aventurine green is really intense. So that's an 8-minute vase from start to finish and 3 gathers. So for my next one I'm going to make a 3 gather one as well, and I'm going to throw in these couple little chips of aventurine blue, and then I'm going to swirl them around and I'm going to throw in this blue on top of it, this ring model blue. And here's the result of that one. So the blue decoration is in the foreground, and in the background is the wispy blue. Really nice, and again full of silvery sparkles. And here's a bigger 4 gather version of that same color combination. And there's the 3rd gather. That's the perfect length and the perfect shape to pick up a fairly big square of glass. What I'm going to be doing next is a cadmium selenium red, and plunging it this way cases it immediately so it's not exposed to any flame. So the changes in density there, that's from putting a drop of water on the piece of glass and fracturing it into little pieces. And then as it melts across the top surface, it flows apart. So it creates these little regions where there's less color. So it's a really nice decorating technique. This is that cadmium red that's rather difficult to work with without it reducing. There we are, different examples of a coloring technique for blown glass that's only possible with a top-loading furnace. Something I'll mention about compatibility. I've probably made close to 1,500 vases using this technique in the last 20 plus years, and I've never had an issue with compatibility. Most of the glass color that I use is bullseye, and I prefer it because it's a richer, denser color than some of the other companies produce. And the base glass that I use is Spectrum's recovery glass, which is a little stiffer than their System 96, so it's probably closer to Bullseye's compatibility anyways. So thanks for watching, and if you like what you see or learn something new, then please help to spread the word about these tutorials among your glassmaking friends. And until next time, have fun bending the rules and trying something new.